welcome to this video tutorial for a spring fresh foliage wreath. My name is Nikki. I am the founder of Studio HOIME. HOIME stands for Here's One I Made Earlier, and I supply DIY craft kits for groups and individuals to try a new skill or hobby without having to buy the necessary materials in bulk quantities or waste any. So as I say, we're making the spring wreath, and I'd just like to say thank you very much, because if you're watching this, it means you've bought one of my kits. So I'll very briefly take you through what you should find in your kit. Firstly, we've got some, it's a variety of eucalyptus, which is called Populus, and it's just got a really big leaf. It's a really good filler. Then we've got olive, which I personally really love because it's got this two-tone on the leaves. On the back it's really silvery, and on the front, if you like, it's dark green, so it adds a nice bit of contrast. Then we've got some fresh rosemary, which is our nod to spring, and wax flower, which I have in white, and it's so delicate and beautiful but at the same time really hardy. And then we've got pussy willow, which is also known as salix and can be manipulated so that, and we'll do something with that later. Then we've got, for the actual wreath ring itself, we've got a copper ring, which we will moss up together. And it's just worth noting, this moss it's sphagnum moss, and it has been grown and cultivated specifically for floristry purposes. It's actually illegal to go and forage moss in the UK and probably elsewhere, because it creates habitats for lots of creatures, and it's really important. So then we've got, to decorate, we've got some speckled eggs in various sizes and some feathers. You'll also find real wire and a piece of twine, and this is for hanging the wreath on your door if you're using it as a door wreath, because obviously it can be used as a door wreath and or a spring Easter centerpiece for the table, or you can use it for both. When you receive your kit, if you're watching this before you're about to start, make sure that when you take all of your foliage out of the box, please take it out straight away and put it into some water. It needs a good drink of water before we start making the wreath, and it will just mean it will last a little bit fresher for a little bit longer. Other than that, the only thing that won't be in the box is a pair of scissors. So if you can grab a pair of scissors and a drink of your choice, mine's a cup of tea because I'm never more than 2 meters away from a cup of tea, we'll get started. I hope you enjoy. Okay, so we're going to start with mossing up our wreath base. So what you need to do is take your reel wire, unravel it just slightly, and we're going to attach it to the copper ring. Take the end of the reel wire and wrap it round the outer circle of the copper ring, and then twist the wire on itself just to secure it, just a couple of times. And then with the excess, just wrap it round the copper ring. And now your reel wire should be nice and secure. We're going to create a zigzag around the wreath ring with the wire, just so that when the moss sits on it, it doesn't fall through. So the technique I like to use is over and under. So you take your hand over, and then you take the reel wire under again, and repeat over and under, over and under. Each time you pull it back under, give it a tiny little tug. And you should be pulling this towards your body. I find it's much easier that way. So you should have something that resembles this. It doesn't need to be perfect. So keep your reel wire attached. Don't snip it off yet. And take the sphagnum moss and just empty it out of the bag. First of all, we just want to tease the moss apart. It's been compacted in the bag for a while, so you just want to fluff it up so you know what you've got to work with.
We're going to moss the ring in sections. So if you take a small bundle and almost start to make a loose sort of sausage length. You don't want it to be too taut. You want it to be fairly loose, but you want to have a good clump of it. Transfer this onto your ring, and we're going to use the same method as before, over and under with the reel wire. So whilst holding with one hand, take the reel wire and place it over and under, and then pulling it taut and work your way around. It takes a little while to get to grips with the technique of this, but don't worry too much. You can always unwind it and start again. Don't forget to give the wire a little tug just to make sure that the moss is firmly in place. Keep repeating this until you've worked all the way round. It's worth noting that when you add another section of moss, slightly overlap it so that you don't get any gaps. Don't mind me, I'm just going to speed this up so that the overall length of the video isn't far too long. Feel free to pause this and just work at your own pace. It's really important not to rush these steps, just take your time and enjoy the craft. A lot of people find that if both their hands and their mind are occupied on the same thing, they find it really relaxing and it actually slows their heart rate down. And this is all part of doing something that is a craft that is mindful. So just enjoy. When you've gone all the way around with the reel wire, I like to go around again, just tucking in any loose ends, just to make sure we've got a firm base, but also it's just nice and tidy. Once you've gone round a second time, we just need to cut the reel wire off. So I would take around about 10 centimetres and snip with a pair of scissors. We won't be using the reel wire anymore, so you can go ahead and put that to one side. So to tie off, we just want to take the end of the reel wire and poke it back through the moss. So it wants to go the front of the wreath ring, underneath the copper, out towards the back. And if you follow doing this like you're sewing a needle and thread, back through and find it at the back, and then you should be left with just a short amount of excess. And with this excess, all we want to do is fold that back in on itself and poke it into the moss, just to make sure there's no exposed wires at the back to protect your door. And that's it, that's your base ready. Place your wreath ring to one side and we'll start cutting the olive foliage. It might be a good idea to watch this whole section first so you get an idea of the lengths you need and the positioning, and then go back and do it and pause as you go. We're aiming for a few variations in length here because the longer pieces will help create the shape and the shorter pieces will create some fillers. We're also aiming to use the whole of the branch. So I cut in a specific place, which is just above where a leaf is. And that way you can make 2 or 3 pieces out of one branch. As a general rule, try to cut the stem diagonally so that you're creating a point which will help you get it through the moss easier. You might find it easier and safer to cut a few pieces first and put them into the wreath, and then you'll get a feel for the kind of the lengths and the number of pieces that you'll need, rather than cut everything. Before you start, you must remember that all of the foliage, as a general rule, should just follow the same direction. It's going to go in at a diagonal kind of angle, and you just want to follow that direction the whole way around. And do this with every single element that we put in. Also, with each piece, sometimes it generally has a natural curve in it, and you want to work with that curve to follow, again, the direction that all the foliage is going to be travelling in. I've decided here that this piece is slightly too long, so I'm just cutting the end off. To create a full wreath shape, you want to put the end of the stem in at a diagonal, both horizontally and vertically, so that it's coming out at an angle at the top, but also at the side. It's better to work with the larger pieces first, then plot them in, say, 3 or 5 sections, so that you're filling it out gradually and everything is equidistant. That way you'll get a more even spread of foliage. Also, make sure the end goes in as far as you can push it. That way it'll ensure that it's a bit more secure. It doesn't matter if the end comes through the back, we will deal with that later. Then continue to populate your wreath with more foliage in between the branches that you've just put in there. That way, again, you're making sure everything's even, but you're also just making sure you're filling any gaps that need it, and you can cut your stems to the length that you require at this point. If you're doing this for the first time, I would say this is the hardest part, because you don't really know what you're looking for at this point, and it won't resemble anything like a wreath. So have a bit of faith, keep plodding on, and just keep checking, holding it up and looking to see that it's even. There's lots of foliage that's going to go on top of this, so don't worry about gaps, just looking for an even spread. Next we'll move on to our rosemary, and I've already cut this. You're looking for, I would say, 3 decent bunches that are quite bushy, and then the rest, I would say you're looking for a few different lengths of what I would call sprigs, and removing the leaves from the end to make it easier to pierce into the moss ring. Take the 3 larger pieces and put them at 3 equal points. So imagine you've got a triangle and place them in there, again, just to keep it even. And then we're going to populate it with the smaller lengths, using some of the longer lengths on the outside and the shorter ones on the inside. One little tip is to keep picking up your wreath and looking at it. Don't forget that if this is either if it's a table centerpiece or it's going on the door, you're going to see this from lots of angles. So you're going to see the inside of the ring and the outside of the ring. So try and use the smaller bits to cover up that exposed bit of moss. There will be a little bit of exposed moss, and that's all part of it. But it's just about filling in the gaps, layering with lots of different textures. As you can see, it's starting to take shape. Next we'll move on to our eucalyptus, and this is a really great filler with its nice big leaves. And as I've shown you before, we want to use the whole stem, so when you're cutting it into sections, make sure you cut just above a leaf. That way you will be able to get 2 or even 3 stems out of one stem. And again, a variety of size is what we need here. We want some big sections that we'll put in first, with some mid and small sections as well. Again, you might want to watch this whole section before you start cutting so you get an idea of what you need. Okay, so I've got my eucalyptus in 2 piles, big and small, and I'm going to take the larger sections first and do what we did as before. So I'm going to populate it in, say, 5 points around the wreath first, just to get some even spacing and create some shape. Then start working in between those sections and work your way around just to fill in the gaps. And as I say, this is a great space filler, so any areas that you think are looking sparse, you can just add some more eucalyptus. There's plenty there. You don't have to use all of it. You could wait, keep some back and wait until the end and fill any gaps with it. Also, don't forget the middle of your mossed ring. There might be some areas when you look at it from the front that you can see the moss in the middle. So use some of this eucalyptus to fill those gaps. This also generally helps to make it feel a bit fuller. So right now your wreath should be looking fairly full with lots of texture and variety and different shades and tones of greens running through it. Now we move on to our final piece of foliage, which is the wax flower. And just as before, we want to cut down some smaller and some larger clumps so that you get some decent clumps of the flower heads and then some smaller ones to populate the smaller gaps. Once again, take the larger pieces and put them in equally around the wreath, just so that you're spreading them out evenly. These will add a little pop of white in amongst the green, and they'll give it another dimension and just bring it to life. Make sure that you keep holding it up or ask someone to hold it in front of you so you can see where there are any gaps and you can put some of the smaller wax flower sections into those gaps. And that's all of our foliage into the wreath. Next, we're going to add some decoration with our pussy willow stems. These are great because although they're thin, they do have a completely different texture, look and feel, and they just add an element of interest. Obviously these are too long, so we need to cut them down. And as before, we'll just cut just above the little buds to cut it down into sections. I like to cut each one down into 2 sections, but you could probably get away with 3 if you want to work with some shorter lengths. Pussy willow is really great because you can manipulate the shape, so we can bend it so that we create a curve that then mimics the curve of our wreath. I tend to put the longer sections on the outside and the shorter sections on the inside, and I also try to bury the pussy willow in amongst the foliage that's there. It just makes it look a little bit more natural. And there we go. It's pretty subtle, but it does add just that little bit extra. And finally we come to our decoration embellishment. So we've got some feathers and some faux speckled eggs, together with some skewers that we need to cut down. I recommend that you take the pointy tapered end off, as this doesn't give us any friction. So you just snip the end off. It can be quite tough, so you might even need a pair of secateurs for this. And then chop it in half. They do go everywhere, so I recommend maybe holding both ends while you do this. You'll notice that some of the smaller of the eggs already have a wire on them, so you only need to cut enough to cover the other larger and medium-sized eggs. All you need to do is take the end of the skewer and gently twist it to force it into the bottom of the egg and poke it in, almost so that the skewer is all the way in, just so that it feels a bit secure. Do this with the other eggs in preparation, and then you want to put clusters of the eggs into areas where maybe there's a gap or the foliage is quite low. And again, if you put the skewer in at an angle and then secure it in place, it should hold. And if you do this with the largest one first, it might be easier to find your position, and then follow with the medium and the small. As the smaller egg already has a thin wire attached to it, once the wire goes through and comes out the other side of the mossed wreath ring, turn the wire back on itself and poke it back through into the back of the moss ring. This just enables it to be secured, but also means that there's no exposed wires. You don't have to put them in clusters, it's just my preference. You could spread them out across the wreath, but I'm choosing to put them in a cluster in 3 equidistant places. The ends of the skewers will probably come out the other side, but don't worry about those just yet. We'll chop them off at the end. You'll probably notice that there's 2 sizes of feathers, and I generally put as with everything else, I've put the larger, longer one of the 2 on the outside in amongst the foliage, and then the smaller one I tend to put sort of aligned with the middle or on the inside. I also tend to pair the two sizes up, so a long and a short one in and around the same area. So again, I'll be working in a triangle. If you want to keep these even, they'll be positioned 3 places equidistant from one another. There we go. It's also worth noting that these feathers are also put in the same direction as the direction that the foliage is all travelling in round the wreath ring. The last thing to do is chop any stems that have come through the back of the moss ring, as this will have happened. So all you do is gently turn it round and then snip off any excess stems that are poking back through, including any of the skewers. Again, you might need some secateurs to do this.
Okay, so that's it, and you're done. So you should be looking at something like this. The only thing I've done is add the twine at the back. I would thread it through the back underneath the copper frame, thread it through on itself so that it's nice and secure, and then obviously cut it to the length that you need. The only other thing to say is to keep the moss at the back as damp as you can. Every couple of days, just give it a spray or even a water with a watering can, and that will just help to keep everything staying fresher for longer. Another alternative, as I mentioned before, is to use this as a table centrepiece for your Easter feast or when you've got friends and family coming round. And it's a good idea, just because of the damp on the bottom or because of any exposed wires, just maybe use a chopping board or a charger plate to put it onto. I've got a wooden slice, and then glass vase with a nice thick pillar candle. Just simply put it over the top. Always good to use a vase so that there's no naked flame that could potentially catch any of the foliage alight, as it will be fairly dry. But that's just a really effective way of making your table look gorgeous. So thank you very much. I really hope you've enjoyed it. I would love to see the results of your wreaths or centerpieces. So please do take some photos. Be proud of it and tag me on Instagram or Facebook. The name is @Studio_HOIME. So like I say, I hope you've enjoyed it. Thank you very much for joining me. I'll see you again soon.